I have been refused planning permission. Those are the words that so many people say when they encounter the planning system, from the beginner all the way through to the more experienced people. The planning system has a way of scuppering even the best laid plans. So in this video, what I'm going to be going through is the best ways of getting planning permission, even if you've been refused planning permission. So I'm going to be looking at 3 options and the pros and cons on each, and I'll also be going through a bonus 4th option, so make sure you stick around for that. And I'm Ian Gracie, so I've been in the planning industry for over 10 years, and in that time I've seen property investors and developers make incredible amounts of money through the planning system. And this video is one example of that. Planning refusals are an area where so much value and so much money is left on the table by people that just don't know the process. So hopefully this video will give you an insight into that. So one of the first options you can go for is that you can resubmit your application, provided that it's broadly the same type of development. So if you've got a rear extension that was refused, say, and there was something about the design that it was refused on. Maybe you had a rear extension that had a pitched roof, but the description of development still said erection of a rear extension. You can resubmit the application for free with a slightly altered design. So as long as the description of development is the same and broadly the development is the same, but just a slight design change, you can resubmit your application totally for free. So this is a really good option. So the pros of this option is that it's free. That's the huge one. So you may have got information through the application process from the officer saying in principle this is okay, but there's something wrong with the design. I mean, in a great world they would have helped you negotiate during the application so that you could have got permission at the time, but let's assume the worst case scenario and that you've got a refusal. You can resubmit the application based on the advice you heard from the officer. The con of this approach is that actually you have to go through the planning process again, which a lot of people get frustrated by. So depending on how long it actually took you to get your original refusal, you may be turned off by this approach, because in an ideal world everyone's getting their decision within 8 weeks, but I know for a fact that that's not happening these days. Lots of extensions of time are being asked for by officers. So really, I mean, you're looking, I don't know what the average time is, but it's certainly a lot longer than 8 weeks at the moment. So that can be a big con for people that might just not want to go through the planning process again, the whole consultation period, the whole toing and froing with the officer, make sure the application's validated, all of that. That can be a big turn off. But if you do that, you've got an opportunity for a free application, go through the planning process again, and hopefully what the officer told you is right, and that then you can get your approval that you've been looking for. So let's look at option number 2, which is go for pre-application advice. So if you've been refused planning and you're not getting anywhere with the officer during the process, sometimes when you submit an application, the officer, as you know, it's very hard to get hold of them, if you get hold of them at all, and then sometimes a decision just gets spits out at the end. But if you really want to just talk to an officer, sit down with them and talk about what is acceptable on your site, you have the option to go for pre-application advice. And this is a process whereby you submit a kind of notional proposal to the planning department, an officer will be allocated to it, and then they will give you advice kind of as to whether or not your proposal is acceptable. Now there's a big caveat with this one, is that quite often people that go through the pre-application process come off kind of none the wiser to when they started. So pre-application is a way of local authorities kind of getting income into their department, because government has cut all, their government has reduced the amount of financing that local departments have. So this is a way of them to get more income. Now you'd think, because it's a source of income, that they would treat pre-apps with a higher priority. Unfortunately, it doesn't really work out like that, because this will just be one of 100 other cases that a local authority or even one officer has. And the problem that a local authority has is they've got pressure from both sides. They need income, and they've got a pressure to make their income, but they're also getting a lot of pressure from the government to determine all of their applications on time. So it becomes a balancing act of which one do they prioritise most, and that's why they just go through a list one by one, and it takes so long because there's no priorities of certain things, and local departments are completely under-resourced. So if I had been refused planning permission, I personally would not go for this advice, because like I said, sometimes you're none the wiser as to after you get the advice and you're a bit confused. A lot of pre-application letters, and people will attest to this that have seen them, they're very non-committal, and also anything they do say, there's a little sentence at the end that says this is not binding on the council. That basically allows them to change their mind when the application comes in. So it can be helpful, but if I have been refused planning permission, this is not the option that I would choose. And the third option that you have, and I would encourage most people to do this in most circumstances, is to appeal the decision. So for a householder application, so anything like rear extensions, roof extensions, side extensions, you have 12 weeks from the point of decision to appeal the decision. For anything else, it's 6 months. So in that 12 weeks, you have the option to appeal the decision. So the pros of this are that in a lot of instances, you'll get a much fairer decision-making process. So local councils quite often, not always, refuse applications and proposals for kind of reasons that wouldn't stand up to scrutiny at appeal. And a lot of people just don't know that. So a lot of people would just take their decision, I've been refused, and they wouldn't know what to do with it, and they would just get frustrated with the council and give up. But really, if you had the kind of know-how to appeal, which is free, which is the other pro, then you can go down the appeal process and get a much fairer decision-making process. So it's a really key thing to know. Most people don't know about it, or a lot of people don't know about it, and it's a really important thing to know, because you've got to hold councils to a standard. Because, like I say, a lot of councils will issue decisions that are the decisions are a bit wishy-washy. They're also blanket. You can't find anything in there that's very specific to your site sometimes. So appealing can be a really beneficial way. And like I say, there's no fees with it. The fees that you might incur if you have a consultant on board and you want to submit this, and you want them to submit the statement for you, then there might be a cost for that, but there's no fee for it. So there's a huge benefit. Now the con is that you have to go through the planning inspectorate, and just like local councils, their funding and their resourcing is also stretched. So the decision timing that you used to get that was so strict before is also slipping as well. So it can take a little bit longer to be issued, but on the flip side, if you were to go through the planning process again, it could take you a lot longer. I mean, by the time you got your refusal, as you may well know, we could be talking about months, and it could take a long time with the appeal as well, but probably not as long. And at least know. So if you're a bit unconvinced by your council, you're not sure they're looking at your case fairly, you can go through the appeal process, and then you have a kind of higher degree of certainty. So if I had been refused planning permission, this is the option that I would probably choose. So I said that I'd be giving you a bonus fourth option, and the bonus one is that you can appeal under non-determination. And this is really an option for people that are still waiting for their decision, and they're wondering what their options are. So once your application gets validated, the council has 8 weeks to determine the application. Once that 8 weeks passes, you have the ability to appeal under non-determination, which basically says, okay, council, you're not deciding my application, I'm going to the inspectorate, they can decide it for me. And there's a huge pro of that, is that you have control over your application. You're not chasing the council anymore, you're not wondering what they're thinking, you're just saying, okay, enough is enough, I'm going to the inspectorate, they can decide. Now that will add on time, but you do have the certainty that you're handing it over to someone else and you're not convinced by your council. The con of this is that, as I've kind of alluded to already, there is an additional time. It's not like you submit the appeal and then you get a decision really quickly. Like I said, the planning inspector has their own timeline, so you're looking at a considerable kind of add-on time, but there's that level of control. The other one is that if you're appealing non-determination because you just can't get hold of your officer, that's not to say the officer doesn't know about it. I'm sure they do know about it, but they will have your kind of application on their desk ready to be determined, and they just need to write up their report. They haven't got round to it yet. They're not answering your calls. The second that they see your notification of appeal come in, you've basically taken a massive workload off them for that immediate time frame, so they'll just relax, and then you'll never get your decision that way. So kind of strategic thing is to use this kind of strategically. If you just blanket throw in a non-determination appeal every time that you have an application, then if you're working with that authority, you do build up a reputation, and you'll kind of it'll hamper your negotiation capabilities in the future. I mean, that really is used in very limited circumstances. Does that kind of use case happen? But it's something to think about. So once you submit it, they get a notification. It's not like you will suddenly hurry them up. The council won't just say, oh, they're going to appeal, we better get our decision out. The opposite happens. They just say, okay, we're not going to do it then, and they'll just wait for the appeal to come through, and they'll write their report then. So just bear that in mind when you use this option. It is a good option, but just bear that in mind. So those are the options. If you've been refused planning permission and you think there's another strategy that I haven't spoken about, please put it in the comments below, or if there's anything that I've already said that you want to know more about, again, put it in the comments below and I'll be happy to do another video to kind of add to it. So don't forget to like and subscribe to this video, and share it to anyone that you think will benefit from it, particularly someone who might be waiting for their decision, they don't know what to do. So I will see you on the next video.